Nature is unforgiving, and the results can be terrifying when humans cross paths with its most powerful predators. Out in the wild, any mistake can become tragic, and not even controlled environments can guarantee safety regarding bears. Join us as we unravel the details of 6 chilling tales, each a reminder that one wrong move can turn an ordinary moment into a fight for survival. The Ivanov family had always loved the wilderness. Vladimir, a geologist, spent years working in remote regions, and his wife, Natalia, a schoolteacher, shared his appreciation for nature's quiet beauty. Their children, Alexei and Daria, grew up listening to their parents' stories of rugged landscapes and wildlife, their young minds filled with wonder rather than fear. The children longed for their outdoor adventures. In February 2025, the family's trip to Siberia was meant to escape from the bustle of Moscow, a time to disconnect from the world and become a stronger family. They had rented a small wooden cabin deep in the wilderness, far from towns, roads, or distractions. It was meant to be a peaceful retreat, but it became something else, something far more sinister. February 10th, 2025 had been a calm day. Snow stretched endlessly around them, swallowing the sounds of their laughter as they played outside. The cold and refreshing air almost burned their lungs, and the towering trees watched silently, their branches heavy with ice. Inside the cabin, the fire crackled, casting flickering shadows against the walls as Natalia prepared dinner for her family. The rich aroma of roasted meat and warm bread filled the air. They ate heartily, unaware that the scent of their meal would soon bring their doom. Night fell quickly in the Siberian wilderness, the darkness absolute, swallowing the landscape in an icy grip. The wind howled outside, rattling the wooden walls. But the Ivanovs felt full and content, protected against the elements by the warmth of their cabin. Together they curled up in their warm beds. The fire burned low, its embers pulsing softly like a dying heart. In their exhaustion, however, the parents overlooked one detail. The window beside the small dining table had been left slightly open, just enough for the night air to slip through, just enough for the scent of their dinner to drift outside. Outside, something was waiting for the right time to strike. It was a grizzly bear, young and hungry. The animal had been wandering the area for days, its massive body covered in thick fur, its muscles coiled beneath the dense layer of fat that kept it alive through the harsh winter. Hunger gnawed at its belly. Food was still scarce this time of the year. The scent of cooked meat, strong, rich, impossible to ignore, cut through the night air, luring it forward. It moved silently, its heavy paws pressing into the snow without a sound, its breath rising in thick plumes. The wind carried the scent straight to its powerful nose, leading it directly to the cabin. The animal circled the structure, sniffing, searching for an opportunity. The wooden walls smelled of people, warmth, and food. It stood on its hind legs, towering over the cabin, its claws scraping against the timber. The open window was small, but the bear was determined. It pressed its weight against the frame with brute force, pushing and testing. The old wood groaned, then splintered, the latch snapping under the strain. The bear squeezed through, its massive bulk forcing the window wider, glass shattering as it crashed into the cabin. The noise jolted Vladimir awake. His heart pounded as his eyes adjusted to the darkness. A heavy, musky scent filled the air, rank fur, damp earth, something primal. The floor creaked under immense weight. He had no time to react before the bear moved faster than something so large had any right to be. The first blow came without warning, tipped with claws as long as knives. A paw swiped through the air, catching Vladimir in the chest. The impact sent him sprawling, his ribs cracking like dry branches beneath the force. The bear lunged again, its jaws snapping shut just inches from Vladimir's face. He struggled, kicking at the beast, but it was relentless. Natalia woke to the sound of flesh tearing, of bones breaking. The shadows shifted, monstrous and unfamiliar. Then she saw it. The hulking figure of the bear, its eyes black and soulless fur matted with blood. Her husband's blood. A strangled scream tore from her throat, waking the children. Alexei sat up, his breath hitching in terror as Daria whimpered beside him, her small hands clutching her blanket. Natalia tried to move and reach her children, but the bear was already approaching them. It moved with terrifying efficiency, driven by its killer instinct. She grabbed the nearest thing and hurled it. It shattered against the beast's side, but the bear barely flinched. 9-year-old Alexei scrambled off the bed, his instincts screaming to run, but there was nowhere to go. The bear lunged, knocking him to the ground. His scream was cut short as the weight of the animal crushed him. Daria sobbed, too young to understand, too small to fight. Natalia threw herself at the bear, clawing at its fur, striking it with fists that had no effect. It turned, jaws snapping, and in one brutal motion it ended her struggle. Blood splattered against the walls, darkening the wooden planks. Daria was the only one left. The little girl's small form trembled, her cries swallowed by the chaos. The bear loomed over her, its breath hot against her tear-streaked face. For a moment, it hesitated, as if considering, as if something in her innocence gave it pause. But hunger was stronger than hesitation. The last sound in the cabin was the bear's heavy breathing, the wet, sickening crunch of teeth meeting flesh. Then silence. The horror was complete when help arrived, summoned by a local ranger who had noticed the Ivanovs hadn't checked in. The cabin door hung open, the wind howling through the space. Snow had begun to drift inside, covering the crimson-stained floor in a deceptive blanket of purity. The bodies lay scattered, torn, and lifeless. The bear was gone, its hunger sated. The snow had covered its tracks, but authorities knew a bear was responsible for the carnage. They launched a hunt, tracking the beast through the dense forest. They found it 3 days later, still lingering near the area, as if waiting for more. It did not flee when the bullets came and did not resist as it was put down. It had fulfilled its nature. It had done what it was born to do. The deaths of the Ivanov family sent shockwaves through the region. The news reached Moscow quickly, reaching people who had never met them but now whispered their names in sorrow. Their deaths were a harsh reminder that nature was indifferent to human presence, that one small mistake, a single open window, could be the difference between life and death in the wild. The tragedy forced authorities to tighten safety regulations in remote areas, and new laws were implemented to prevent such horror from repeating. But no law could bring the Ivanovs back. The cabin's owner destroyed it as if its dark past could be erased, but the memory of the disaster lingered. The Arctic wind cut through the barren landscape as the police vehicle rumbled along the icy road. Snow drifts, sculpted by relentless gusts, lined the desolate stretch leading toward the reported sighting. The officers inside the car had responded to many calls before, reports of prowling bears wandering too close to town, but most ended without incident. Polar bears usually avoided humans, retreating when confronted. This time would be different. 38-year-old officer Lars Jensen had spent much of his life patrolling these frozen lands, but had never encountered a direct polar bear attack. A seasoned officer, he had built a reputation as level-headed and methodical, trusted by his colleagues. His partner, Eric Dahl, though younger by 4 years, was dependable and strong. But Eric was still learning the unpredictable nature of Arctic law enforcement. 2 other officers, Henrik Madsen, 40, and Jonas Lindberg, 29, rode with them, each armed with non-lethal deterrents, flares, rubber bullets, and noisemakers, standard equipment for dispersing wildlife. Earlier that day, they received a call from a local fisherman who had spotted a large bear near the edge of town. The bear's gaunt frame was barely visible in the dim, overcast light. It was unusual for a bear to venture so close this time of year, especially one described as desperate, lingering rather than passing through. That meant hunger, and hunger always meant danger. The landscape felt unnervingly silent as the officers slowed near the reported location. Snowflakes spiraled lazily through the air, the crunch of tires on packed ice the only sound. The officers stepped out cautiously, weapons drawn, eyes scanning the white expanse. And then, they saw a blur of movement. The polar bear charged from behind a cluster of frozen boulders, emerging like a ghost from the snow. It was massive, a towering force of nature, its thick fur streaked with dirt, its ribs faintly visible beneath its hide. This was no ordinary encounter. This bear was starving. There was no hesitation, only raw, unrestrained aggression. Lars barely had time to react before the bear was upon them. It moved with terrifying speed for its size, covering the distance in seconds. Jonas was the first to fire a flare, the red streak slicing through the air, but it did nothing to deter the predator. The bear barreled forward, its claws striking Jonas's arm, tearing through his heavy coat like paper. He collapsed, his scream lost in the wind as he clutched his bleeding limb. Henrik fired rubber bullets, each round slamming into the bear's thick hide, but the shots barely registered. The beast's instincts overrode any pain. Its gaping maw, lined with yellowed fangs, snapped shut inches from Eric's leg as he stumbled backward, barely escaping a killing bite. Lars moved fast, reaching for his sidearm. But the bear was faster. With one devastating swipe, its massive paw connected with his chest, the sheer force lifting him off his feet. A sickening crack echoed as he was hurled through the air, landing hard in the snow. Blood seeped into the frost beneath him. The bear pivoted, its deep-set black eyes locking onto Henrik, who had managed to retrieve a flare gun. The officer fired directly at the beast's face. The bear roared in fury, momentarily blinded. It reared onto its hind legs, towering over Henrik, before coming down with unstoppable force. The weight of its body crushed him beneath it. His scream choked off as claws raked across his back, shredding through muscle and bone. Eric, heart pounding, scrambled toward the vehicle, dragging Jonas with him. He fumbled for his radio, his gloved fingers stiff with fear. Backup had already been dispatched, but they were too far away. He turned just in time to see Lars struggling to rise, his breaths ragged. The bear advanced on him, its massive frame casting a long shadow over the blood-streaked snow. Lars reached for his gun, but his movements were sluggish, his injuries severe. The bear lunged. Teeth sank into his shoulder, crunching through layers of fabric and flesh. A cry ripped from his throat as the bear shook him violently, its powerful jaws tearing through sinew and bone. Blood spattered the ice. The world dimmed around Lars, his senses dulling as agony consumed him. He thought of his wife and 2 children waiting at home, their faces flickering in his fading mind like a distant dream. And then, it was over. A single rifle shot cracked through the air. The backup had arrived. A second shot followed, then a third. The bear staggered but did not fall. It turned, snarling, its fur matted with blood. More gunfire erupted, bullets finally penetrating deep enough to drop the beast. It swayed, letting out a final exhale before collapsing into the snow. The silence that followed was deafening. Eric, gasping for breath, knelt beside Jonas, pressing a hand against the wound on his arm to slow the bleeding. His eyes darted toward Henrik, miraculously still breathing, then to Lars. But Lars was gone. There was nothing anyone could do to bring him back. Henrik was clinging to life but unresponsive. Jonas was still conscious but in shock, his face pale from blood loss. The small local community was shocked by the attack. Lars Jensen was mourned as a fallen officer, a man who had faced the brutal nature and paid the ultimate price. The attack reignited debates over wildlife encroachment and human safety in Arctic settlements. Some blamed climate change, the melting ice forcing desperate predators closer to populated areas. Others argued for more aggressive control measures to prevent future tragedies. But there were no simple answers for Eric, Jonas, and Henrik. Only the haunting memory of their fallen colleague and the harsh reminder that survival was never guaranteed in the Arctic. If there was one thing Emily Barnes loved more than anything, it was the wilderness of Montana. At 34, she had spent years hiking across some of the most remote trails in the country, drawn to the solitude and raw beauty of nature. But Montana was special. Over the years, it had become her sanctuary, a place where she could escape the constraints of modern life and lose herself in the vast, untamed landscape. She had hiked alone many times before, confident in her skills, trusting her instincts. But on September 8, 2023, her confidence would not be enough. The day had started like so many others. The scent of pine was thick in the breeze as Emily followed a narrow trail along a river in the northwestern part of Montana. The terrain was rugged but familiar, the towering pines casting long shadows as the sun climbed higher. She had planned this hike carefully, bringing enough supplies for a day's journey. She had checked the weather, packed her bear spray, and noted recent wildlife sightings. There had been reports of grizzly activity, but that was nothing unusual in this part of Montana. Emily moved with ease, her boots crunching softly against the damp earth, her senses tuned to the rhythms of the wild. The sounds of the river accompanied her steps, its current rushing over smooth stones, a constant reminder of nature's power. She was miles from the nearest town, deep in bear country, but she felt no fear. She had encountered bears before, but they usually kept their distance. Today would be no different. But Emily did not know she was being watched. A grizzly bear had been resting in the underbrush near the riverbank, its massive body partially hidden beneath a thicket of huckleberry bushes. It was not just any bear, a dominant male, a mix of muscle and instinct. Even more, the grizzly had recently killed an elk. The remains of the kill lay nearby, a lifeless carcass half buried beneath scattered branches and overturned soil. The scent of blood lingered in the air, an unspoken warning to any intruder who could sense it. But Emily had no way of knowing how close she was to danger. Her path curved unknowingly toward the kill site, her presence an unintentional threat. As she passed within range, the bear's dark eyes locked onto her, its instincts flaring to life. The grizzly would not allow any threat or invasion. The animal let out a sharp huff, low and guttural, cutting through the quiet like a knife. Emily heard it, She froze, her breath catching in her throat. Next thing she knew, the bear erupted from the undergrowth, its bulk shaking the earth as it barreled toward her with terrifying speed. Her instincts took over. She knew her chances of survival were slim, but she had to fight. She reached for the bear spray, her fingers closing around the canister, but the grizzly was too close. It slammed into her, knocking her off her feet. The impact sent the woman crashing onto the damp soil, the air rushing from her lungs as pain lanced through her ribs. She scrambled backward, her heart hammering, but the bear did not retreat. It loomed over her, its breath hot, its eyes wild with aggression. She had to run. The alternative was too grim to consider. Emily pushed herself to her feet and sprinted toward the only escape she could see, the river. Her boots slid on the slick earth as she stumbled down the embankment, her body moving on pure adrenaline. Behind her, the grizzly gave chase. It did not hesitate, did not falter. It pursued with deadly purpose, closing the gap with terrifying speed. The river was her last hope. She plunged into the frigid water, the shock stealing her breath. The current was strong, pulling at her, but she fought against it, pushing toward deeper water. The bear did not stop. It charged into the shallows, its massive paws sending waves crashing in all directions. Emily swam even harder, her limbs burning, her lungs screaming for air. The water slowed her, but it did not slow the bear. It surged forward, reaching out with a swipe that caught her leg, yanking her beneath the surface. She thrashed, struggling against the iron grip of its claws. The world became a chaotic swirl of water and violence. She surfaced, gasping, her arms flailing as she fought to break free. But the grizzly lunged again, its weight driving her under. Emily kicked, clawed, and fought with every ounce of strength, but the bear was too powerful. Its sheer mass pinned her beneath the surface, holding her down as the river churned around them. The water filled her mouth and lungs, her vision darkening as the bear's weight pressed deeper. Her body screamed for air, but there was none. The current pulled at them both, dragging them downstream. But the bear did not let go. It kept her submerged, its rage unyielding, until her struggles weakened. Her movement slowed, then ceased. The last bubbles of her breath slipped away, vanishing into the cold abyss. With the threat now gone, the grizzly finally released Emily. The river carried her lifeless body away, the water washing away the violence of what had just occurred. Hours later, search teams found her downstream, caught among a tangle of fallen branches. Her body was still, her expression frozen in the terror of those final moments. The bear was nowhere to be seen. Emily had known the risks. She had taken precautions, but sometimes even experience was not enough. Her death served as a grim reminder of the wilderness's unforgiving nature, a brutal testament to the power of a predator defending its claim. In the following days, officials patrolled the area, searching for the bear responsible. But in the end, the wilderness remained unchanged. The river continued to flow, the trees stood silent, and the grizzly, somewhere in the vastness of Montana, roamed on, unburdened by the weight of what it had done. Lisa Harper had always been fascinated by animals. At 29, she had visited countless wildlife sanctuaries, documenting her encounters with creatures big and small. Her social media was filled with pictures of her close interactions with animals, some taken in the wild, others in zoos. She prided herself on her connection with nature, believing she could understand animals in ways others could not. On June 14th, 2022, she excitedly visited a zoo in northwestern Montana, her camera slung around her neck as she wandered through the exhibits. The day was warm, the sun casting golden light over the animal enclosures. Families gathered near the grizzly bear exhibit. Watching Titan, a beautiful 6-year-old male, lounged in his enclosure. The massive bear seemed relaxed, his large paws resting in the dirt, his eyes half-lidded in the afternoon heat. Lisa stood at the front of the viewing area, captivated by Titan's size and power. She took several photos, admiring how the light highlighted the bear's thick fur. But admiration wasn't enough for someone like Lisa. She wanted something more, something unique. She had seen people post videos of themselves feeding or touching animals on social media, and she wanted her unforgettable moment. Ignoring the warning signs on the fence, she leaned forward, slipping her hand through the safety bars. Her fingertips brushed against the bear's fur. For a second, nothing happened. Titan didn't move, and his body was still stretched out in relaxation. This only confirmed Lisa's belief that she was special. Encouraged, Lisa reached further, trying to feel the rough texture of Titan's coat. But as she did so, Titan's eyes snapped open, his muscles tensing as he registered the unexpected touch. His massive head swung around, and before Lisa could react, his powerful jaws clamped hard on her hand. The pain was immediate and blinding, a sensation unlike anything she had ever felt. Sharp teeth tore into her fingers, crushing bone and ripping skin. Lisa screamed, trying to yank her arm back, which was wrong. The pain only intensified, and the bear didn't let go. Blood spilled from the wound, dripping onto the ground below. Titan growled, his massive body shifting as he instinctively reacted to the intrusion. Panic surged through Lisa's body, her mind blank with fear as she struggled against the bear's strength. The people around her erupted into chaos. Parents pulled their children away, voices shouting for help. A zoo employee sprinted toward the enclosure, radioing for assistance. Lisa's vision blurred as the pain intensified, her heartbeat pounding in her ears. She fought desperately, twisting her body, kicking at the bars, anything to free herself from the bear's grip. Titan held firm for a moment longer before suddenly letting go, the taste of human flesh foreign to him. Lisa collapsed backward, clutching her mangled hand as she gasped for air. Her fingers were barely recognizable, torn and crushed, blood pooling in her palm. The world around her spun, the shock settling in as the full extent of her injuries became clear. Zoo staff rushed in, acting quickly. A tranquilizer dart embedded itself in Titan's shoulder, his muscles relaxing as the sedative took effect. Another employee applied pressure to Lisa's wounds, speaking urgently to the emergency responders over the radio. The ambulance arrived within minutes, sirens wailing as paramedics worked to stabilize Lisa. The pain was unbearable, each movement sending fresh waves of agony through her body. As they loaded her onto the stretcher, her mind swam with regret. Her reckless decision had led to this moment. The once majestic bear she had admired was now sedated, his enclosure locked down, his fate uncertain. Her hand, her way of capturing the world through her camera, was ruined. At the hospital, doctors worked to save what they could. Her fingers were shattered, tendons torn beyond repair. The road to recovery would be long, filled with surgeries, physical therapy, and pain. Footage of the incident, captured by bystanders, circulated online, sparking outrage and debate. The zoo was blamed for not having stricter barriers. Lisa's actions were also condemned. She was called reckless and irresponsible. Wildlife experts weighed in, emphasizing respecting boundaries, even in controlled environments. Titan's future remained uncertain. While he had only acted on instinct, some questioned whether he would be deemed too dangerous to stay at the zoo. Officials reviewed security footage, evaluating whether further safety measures were needed. In the end, they decided that Titan's reaction was only natural. The animal was spared. Lisa's life had changed in an instant. She had always believed she understood animals and could connect with them in ways others couldn't. But nature was not something to be controlled or taken lightly. It was powerful, unpredictable, and unforgiving. As she lay in the hospital bed, staring at the bandages where her fingers had once been, she realized that no picture, no moment of excitement had been worth the cost. Sarah and Mark were always drawn to the wild, preferring remote trails far from the crowds. At 31, a passionate wildlife photographer, Sarah constantly pursued the perfect shot. Mark, 34, was a seasoned hiker skilled in navigating challenging terrains. Over the years, they had explored numerous national parks, yet nothing could have prepared them for what they would encounter in a national park in northwestern Wyoming on October 3, 2024. They hiked merrily, joking and marveling at the nature surrounding them, their boots crunching against fallen leaves. They had been walking for hours when Sarah suddenly stopped, her breath hitching. Ahead, sprawled across the ground, was a massive grizzly bear, its body still and lifeless. Its fur was matted with blood, deep claw marks slashing across its torso. Flies buzzed around the carcass. The metallic scent of death was heavy in the air. They approached carefully, although it was more than obvious that the animal was dead. Mark knelt beside it, examining the wounds. It was clear the bear had not died from old age or illness. It had been in a brutal fight, likely with another grizzly. Sarah's photographer instincts kicked in. She reached for her camera, eager to capture the rare sight. Mark hesitated but eventually joined her. They posed near the carcass, their excitement overshadowing caution. The forest around them was eerily quiet, but their focus was solely on the lifeless bear. They didn't hear the deep rustling at first, But then, when a branch snapped, their bodies stiffened. They turned toward the dense foliage. From the shadows, a massive grizzly emerged. Its fur was dark with patches of fresh blood, its eyes wild with aggression. The realization hit them like a thunderbolt. This was the bear that had killed the one they had been photographing. The beast let out a roar. They weren't surprised when it charged, but they were terrified. Sarah dropped her camera, adrenaline surging as she grabbed Mark's arm. They turned and ran, their minds consumed by sheer panic. Mark stumbled on an exposed root, pain shooting through his leg as he crashed to the ground. Sarah stopped, her heart pounding, her instincts screaming to keep running, but she couldn't leave him behind. The bear closed the distance, its heavy breaths audible, its powerful limbs propelling it forward like an unstoppable force. Sarah helped Mark to his feet, with no other options, half dragging him as they sprinted toward higher ground. The bear swiped at them, its claws missing Mark's back by mere inches. They reached a steep incline, scrambling up the rocky surface, their muscles burning with exertion. The bear lunged, its claws scraping against the stone as it tried to follow. Just as it seemed they wouldn't make it, the distant sound of an engine echoed through the valley. A ranger's all-terrain vehicle. The bear's ears twitched, reacting to the sound. The sudden noise distracted it for just long enough. With one final burst of energy, Sarah and Mark pulled themselves over the cliff's edge, collapsing in exhaustion. Moments later, a group of park rangers arrived, weapons ready. They fired warning shots, scaring the bear away into the forest's depths. Mark groaned in pain, his leg injury worse than he had realized. Sarah clutched her chest, her breathing ragged. They were safe but shaken. The thrill of their discovery had nearly cost them their lives. The reality of their mistake sank in as they were helped onto the all-terrain vehicle. They had ventured too close to danger, oblivious to the risks. The encounter left its mark, not just in the form of Mark's injury, but in the lesson they had learned. Nature was not a playground. It was raw, unpredictable, and deadly, and sometimes curiosity came at a terrible price. As they rode back to safety, adrenaline slowly drained from their bodies, leaving only exhaustion in its wake. Mark's leg throbbed with pain, but remained silent, lost in thought. Sarah held onto the ranger's shoulder, feeling the rough fabric of his uniform beneath her fingers, grounding her in reality. She glanced back once, just in time to see the bear vanish into the trees, its massive form blending seamlessly with the wilderness. By the time they reached the ranger station, the sun had dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in deep shades of orange and violet. Mark was taken to a small clinic for treatment, while Sarah sat outside, staring at the mountains in the distance. The day's weight pressed down on her, an ache settling deep in her chest. She thought about the bear, the power in its muscles, the wild fury in its eyes. It had been fighting to survive just as they had. They had trespassed into its world without understanding the consequences. It wasn't malice that had driven the attack, but instinct, and they had been lucky, so incredibly lucky, to escape with their lives. As the stars appeared in the sky, a ranger approached her, his expression grim. He told her they would monitor the area closely and ensure no other hikers had encountered the same danger. But his eyes held a deeper message that didn't need to be spoken. This was a warning, a reminder of the thin line between awe and disaster. When Mark finally emerged from the clinic, his leg bandaged and face drawn with exhaustion, Sarah reached for his hand. He squeezed it gently, and no words were needed at that moment. They had faced the wilderness and survived, but would never forget how close they had come to losing everything. Pine Valley Elementary stood on the outskirts of a small Montana town, surrounded by dense forests that stretched for miles. The school had always been cautious about wildlife encounters, reinforcing fences and instructing children on safety. But one mistake, a single unlocked gate, was all it took for disaster to strike. May 18, 2023 was an unseasonably warm day, and the children at Pine Valley Elementary buzzed with excitement as they poured out onto the playground for recess. Among them were three friends: Emma, 10, a quiet girl who loved to read; Lily, 11, the fastest runner in her grade; and Sophie, 12, the adventurous one who always climbed the highest on the jungle gym. The three girls were inseparable, spending every recess together, running, laughing, and playing their favorite game, tag. Unknown to them, hunger and desperation had driven a grizzly bear far from its usual territory. As the snow melted, the bear wandered closer to human settlements, following the scent of garbage bins and livestock feed. Disoriented and thin from months of struggle, the bear prowled on the edge of the woods, its instincts dulled by exhaustion, but its desperation stronger than ever. The unsecured gate had been left open by a distracted maintenance worker. It should have been shut after the morning's deliveries, but in the rush of the school day, it remained ajar. The bear, smelling something unfamiliar yet delicious, perhaps lingering traces of lunches and snacks, stepped cautiously through the opening. At first it moved slowly, its head swinging left and right, sniffing the air. The sound of children's laughter reached its ears, sharp and unfamiliar. The bear hesitated, eyes flicking across the open space of the playground, its massive form partially hidden behind the dumpsters near the school's back entrance. The moment it stepped into the open, chaos erupted. A teacher on duty spotted it first, her breath catching as she realized what was happening. Her whistle pierced the air, a shrill warning. The children turned, their games forgotten, eyes wide with confusion. Then came the screams. The bear, startled by the sudden commotion, tensed, its muscles coiling beneath its thick fur. Panic spread through the playground like wildfire. Children ran in all directions, pushing and stumbling over one another in their desperate bid for safety. Emma, Lily, and Sophie had been near the far end of the playground, farther from the doors. At first, they froze, unsure of what they were seeing. The massive, terrifying bear reared up on its hind legs, towering over them. The moment seemed to stretch endlessly, their young minds struggling to process what was happening. Then it dropped back down, snorting and pawing at the ground, and suddenly, it was moving toward them. Sophie grabbed Emma's hand and pulled her while Lily sprinted ahead, her speed carrying her toward the nearest exit. But the bear's instincts had fully awakened now, lured out by the presence of fleeing prey. It charged forward, drawn by the movement, by the scent of sweat and fear thick in the air. It closed the distance faster than the girls could have imagined. They were running one moment, and the bear's enormous paw lashed out the next. Lily screamed as sharp claws raked across her small back. She tumbled forward, hitting the ground hard. Her vision blurred with pain, but she forced herself to crawl, her breath coming in ragged sobs. The bear turned toward her, its massive head lowering, teeth bared. Blood smeared the dirt beneath her, the pain so intense it nearly blacked out her thoughts. Sophie didn't think, she just reacted. She grabbed the closest thing she could, a rock half buried in the playground dirt, and hurled it with all her might. The rock struck the bear's shoulder, not enough to do real harm, but enough to draw its attention. The bear swung its head toward her, eyes locking onto a new target. Sophie's heart pounded. She knew she couldn't outrun it. Still gripping Sophie's hand, Emma pulled her toward the jungle gym. It was their only chance. If they could climb high enough, maybe the bear would lose interest. They scrambled up, their fingers slipping against the metal bars, slick with sweat. The bear was on them in seconds, rearing up, its claws swiping dangerously close. It roared, shaking the structure with its weight, and Emma screamed as her grip slipped. Sophie grabbed her, struggling to hold on, her muscles burning with the effort. On the ground, teachers had rushed into action. One of them, Mr. Calloway, grabbed a trash can and hurled it at the bear, yelling as loud as he could. Another staff member banged on the metal siding of the school with a baseball bat, the loud noise echoing across the playground. The bear snarled, torn between its prey and the growing disturbance. The hesitation was brief, but it was enough. From the school entrance, the principal emerged with a can of bear spray. She ran forward, her hands steady despite the terror coursing through her veins. She aimed and pressed the trigger. A thick orange cloud burst from the nozzle, spreading through the air. The bear recoiled instantly, shaking its head and snorting, its furious growls turning into pained grunts. It backed away, swiping at its face with its massive paws. The retreat happened in seconds, though it felt like an eternity. The bear turned sharply, staggering away from the stinging mist, its instincts driving it back toward the open gate. It disappeared as quickly as it had come, slipping back into the forest. The playground erupted into cries and frantic movement when it was gone. Teachers rushed to the injured girls. Lily lay trembling on the ground, her back slashed open, but her breathing steady. Emma and Sophie clung to each other, their small bodies shaking uncontrollably. Paramedics arrived within minutes, tending to the wounds, checking for shock, wrapping Lily's injuries before carefully loading her onto a stretcher. The news spread fast. Parents arrived at the school, some crying, others furious, demanding to know how such a mistake had happened. Investigations began immediately, and within hours, wildlife officers were tracking the bear. By the following day, it had been tranquilized and relocated deep into the wilderness, far from human settlements. Lily spent weeks recovering, the scars on her back a permanent reminder of the nightmare that had unfolded that day. Emma and Sophie struggled with fear long after the bear was gone, haunted by the sight of its massive form barreling toward them, by the sound of its growls still echoing in their minds. The school implemented stricter safety measures, reinforcing fences, installing additional security cameras, and conducting more thorough wildlife drills. But nothing could erase what had happened. Pine Valley Elementary will never forget the day the bear came. For the three girls, the scars, both physical and emotional, would never completely fade.